Most people think the brain is powerful when it looks impressive. Big words, complex ideas, fast answers. But that's a misunderstanding. Real brain power doesn't show off. It works quietly, it asks uncomfortable questions, and most importantly, it refuses to pretend. So let's talk about 5 levels. Not levels of intelligence, not IQ, not talent, but levels of how deeply your mind actually works. Level 1, information. This is where almost everyone lives. Facts, quotes, definitions. You read something, you repeat it, and it feels like knowledge, but it isn't. Information is just borrowed thinking. It's useful, but it's fragile. The moment you forget the fact, everything collapses. At this level, the brain feels busy, but produces nothing new. And busy is not the same as powerful. Level 2, understanding. Here, something changes. You stop memorizing and start asking why. Why does this work? Why does this fail? Why is this true instead of something else? Understanding means you can explain an idea without hiding behind fancy language. If you need complexity to sound smart, you don't understand yet. Nature isn't impressed by your vocabulary. When you truly understand something, you feel lighter, not heavier. Your brain simplifies instead of complicates. Level 3, first principle thinking. Now things get interesting. At this level, you stop trusting explanations just because they're popular or official. You break ideas down until there's nothing left to break. You ask, what must be true for this to exist at all? This is uncomfortable. Your brain resists it. Society resists it. But this is where real thinking begins. Most errors in life don't come from lack of intelligence. They come from accepting assumptions without inspection. Level 4, play and curiosity. This is the level schools forget and geniuses never abandon. Here, thinking becomes playful. You experiment. You explore ideas without needing immediate results. You allow yourself to be wrong. Curiosity is not childish. It's disciplined wonder. When you follow curiosity, the brain connects ideas that logic alone would never touch. The mind at play is incredibly serious. It discovers what forced effort never will. Level 5, honest ignorance. This is the highest level and the rarest. You are no longer afraid to say, I don't know. Not as weakness, but as strength. Because the moment you admit ignorance, learning becomes possible again. At this level, your brain stops protecting your ego and starts protecting the truth. You would rather be confused for a moment than wrong forever. And that's real power. So if you want to unlock your brain's true potential, don't chase shortcuts. Don't chase labels. Don't chase motivation. Chase clarity. Chase curiosity. And above all, never fool yourself. Because the easiest person to fool is yourself. Most people believe that having a powerful brain means knowing a lot of things. They collect facts the way others collect souvenirs. Quotes, formulas, statistics, definitions. The more they can repeat, the smarter they feel. But this feeling is deceptive. Information creates the illusion of intelligence, not the reality of it. A brain filled with information is not necessarily a brain that can think. It's often just a storage unit. You can memorize a book and still have no idea what it truly means. You can repeat an explanation perfectly and still be unable to use it when the situation changes even slightly. That's because information is passive. It sits there. It doesn't move, it doesn't adapt, and it doesn't create. Real intelligence begins the moment you stop asking what is the answer and start asking why does this work at all. That shift is small, but it changes everything. When you chase information, your brain waits to be fed. When you chase understanding, your brain becomes active. It starts testing ideas, poking holes in them, and rebuilding them in simpler forms. Think about how often people confuse complexity with depth. Long explanations, technical words, complicated diagrams. These things look impressive, but they often hide confusion. If an idea cannot be explained in plain language, it's usually because the person explaining it doesn't fully grasp it themselves. True understanding does the opposite. It removes unnecessary parts. It makes ideas feel obvious in hindsight. Information also has an expiration date. Facts change. Theories evolve. What was considered true a century ago can be laughably wrong today. If your intelligence is built only on stored facts, it collapses the moment those facts change. Understanding, on the other hand, survives. When you understand the underlying principles, you can adapt to new information without starting from zero. Another problem with information is that it encourages mental laziness. Once you have an answer, the brain relaxes. It stops questioning. It stops exploring. But intelligence is not a resting state. It's a process. It lives in motion, not in conclusions. The moment you think you know, learning quietly dies. Understanding forces honesty. It exposes gaps in your thinking that memorization can hide. You might know the formula, but do you know where it comes from? You might know the rule, but do you know why it exists? The discomfort you feel when you can't explain something simply is not failure. It's a signal. It's your brain telling you that there's more work to be done. When you replace information with understanding, something strange happens. You start forgetting details, but gaining clarity. You stop clinging to exact words and start seeing patterns. And patterns are powerful. They allow you to transfer knowledge from one area to another. That's when thinking becomes flexible instead of brittle. This is why real learning often feels slower at first. Understanding takes effort. It requires stopping, questioning, and sometimes admitting that you don't know what you thought you knew. But in the long run, it's faster. Because once you understand something deeply, you don't need to relearn it, you own it. So the first step to unlocking your brain's true power is not consuming more information. It's resisting that urge. It's choosing depth over volume. It's being willing to look simple in a world that rewards sounding smart. Because intelligence is not about how much you can store in your mind. It's about how clearly you can think when the answers are not already written down. There is a strange habit people have when they feel uncertain. They add complexity. They use longer sentences, bigger words, and more complicated explanations, hoping that difficulty will disguise confusion. And often it works, at least on the surface. Others nod along, impressed, and everyone walks away believing something meaningful just happened. But nothing did. No understanding was created, only noise. Simplicity is not the absence of depth. It is the result of depth. When an idea has been examined from every angle, broken apart, rebuilt, and tested, what remains is usually simple, not because the idea was easy, but because everything unnecessary has been removed. What's left is the core, the part that actually does the work. If you truly understand something, you can explain it without hiding. You don't need jargon as armor. You don't need complexity as a shield. You can speak plainly because you're not afraid of the idea collapsing under inspection. In fact, you welcome inspection. A simple explanation invites questions, and questions are how ideas get stronger. Many people mistake clarity for oversimplification. They think that if an explanation sounds easy, it must be shallow. But the opposite is usually true. Shallow understanding collapses the moment you push on it. Deep understanding bends, adapts, and holds. Simplicity doesn't weaken ideas. It stress tests them. Think about how children ask questions. They don't accept vague answers. They keep asking why until the explanation either reaches something solid or falls apart completely. Adults often stop asking too soon, not because they understand, but because they don't want to feel foolish. Complexity becomes a social agreement to stop thinking further. But the mind doesn't care about social comfort. It cares about coherence. When an idea truly makes sense, it connects naturally to other ideas. It doesn't need memorization tricks. It doesn't need constant review. You remember it because it fits. Simplicity also exposes self-deception. When you try to explain something in plain language and fail, there's nowhere to hide. You can't blame the listener. You can't blame the topic. The only explanation is that your understanding is incomplete. This moment can feel uncomfortable, but it's one of the most valuable signals our brain can receive. It tells you exactly where to dig deeper. People often rush past this discomfort. They memorize more details, stack more explanations on top, and hope the structure holds. But complexity built on weak foundations always collapses eventually. Simplicity forces you to fix the foundation before building higher. Another powerful effect of simplicity is transfer. When you understand something clearly, you can use it in new situations. You're not trapped repeating the same steps in the same context. You see the principle underneath, and principles travel well. They apply across problems, fields, and even mistakes. This is why real experts often sound surprisingly plain when they speak. Not because they know less, but because they know what matters and what doesn't. They don't waste energy decorating ideas. They aim straight at the truth. Simplicity is not about dumbing things down for others. It's about refusing to fool yourself. It's a discipline. It demands patience, humility, and a willingness to sit with confusion until it clears. But once it does, the reward is enormous. A mind that moves freely instead of dragging excess weight. So if you want to test your understanding, don't ask how much you know. Ask how simply you can explain it. If you can make it clear without distortion, you're close. If not, that's not failure. It's an invitation. That's where real learning begins. Most people live inside ideas they did not choose. They inherit explanations, rules, and beliefs the way they inherit language, without ever questioning how they were built. This works well enough most of the time, which is why it's so dangerous. When something works, the brain relaxes. It stops asking whether it works because it's true, or simply because everyone agrees to act as if it is. Thinking from first principles means refusing that comfort. It means stripping an idea down to the things that cannot be removed without the idea collapsing completely. Not what is commonly said, not what is written in textbooks, but what must be true for the thing to exist at all. This kind of thinking feels slow and awkward at first. You feel like you're undoing progress. Everyone else seems to be moving faster, confidently stacking conclusions on top of conclusions while you're still asking basic questions. But speed without direction is not intelligence. It's just motion. Assumptions are the invisible walls of thought. You don't see them, so you don't test them. You build entire belief systems on top of them without ever checking if the ground underneath is solid. First principle thinking is the act of making those walls visible. Once you see them, you can decide whether to keep them, move them, or tear them down completely. A common mistake is to confuse experience with truth. This is how it's always been done, feels convincing, but history is full of ideas that survived for centuries while being completely wrong. Longevity does not equal correctness. Popularity does not equal truth. Consensus is often just shared convenience. When you break a problem down to first principles, you stop asking what do others think and start asking what must be true. This changes the nature of thinking entirely. Instead of searching for better opinions, you search for constraints. What cannot be violated? What cannot be ignored? Those answers are far more valuable than advice. This process also reveals how often people mistake labels for explanations. Naming something feels like understanding it, but names are shortcuts, not answers. First principle thinking forces you to go beyond labels and confront mechanisms. How does this actually work? What causes what? What happens if I remove this part? It's uncomfortable because it threatens identity. Many beliefs are tied to who we think we are. Questioning them feels personal, even when it shouldn't be. But the brain's job is not to protect identity. It's to discover what's real. When those two goals conflict, truth should win. Another challenge is that first principle thinking offers no immediate reassurance. You can't lean on authority. You can't hide behind tradition. You're alone with the problem and your reasoning. That isolation scares people away. But it's also where original ideas are born. Once you learn to think this way, something shifts. Problems that once seemed complicated become manageable. Not because they're smaller, but because they're clearer. You know which parts matter and which are just decoration. You stop fighting symptoms and start addressing causes. This kind of thinking doesn't make you contrarian for its own sake. It makes you precise. You accept ideas when they survive scrutiny, not when they feel comfortable. You reject ideas when they fail under pressure, even if they're popular. The world runs on assumptions. That's unavoidable. But your mind doesn't have to. Every time you break an idea down to its foundation, you reclaim a little bit of intellectual freedom. And freedom is the real power here. Not the freedom to believe anything, but the freedom to believe what survives honest examination. Curiosity is often dismissed as a childish trait, something to outgrow once you enter adulthood. Society praises certainty, confidence, and efficiency, and it treats questions as interruptions rather than tools. But curiosity is not frivolous. It is the engine of real intelligence. Without it, even the most brilliant minds stagnate. Without it, knowledge becomes a cage rather than a bridge. At this level, thinking becomes playful. You approach ideas not with the pressure of needing an answer, but with the delight of exploration. You ask questions simply because you want to know, not because you are trying to impress someone or solve a problem. This is different from idle daydreaming. It is deliberate, disciplined curiosity. It is serious fun. Play in thought allows your brain to connect ideas in ways strict logic alone cannot. When you are not afraid to experiment mentally, you begin to notice patterns that others overlook. You start seeing relationships between concepts that, at first glance, seem unrelated. Curiosity transforms the mind into a laboratory where ideas can collide and produce insights spontaneously. Many people stop being curious because it feels inefficient. They want answers quickly, ready-made, preferably from someone else. But the mind does not truly learn by consumption alone. It learns by engagement. Asking what if or why not forces you to wrestle with ideas actively. This is how understanding deepens and how creativity is born. Play also reduces fear. When you approach an idea as a game rather than a test, failure loses its sting. You are no longer paralyzed by the possibility of being wrong. Instead, you experiment, take risks, and explore paths that might seem foolish on the surface. Often, these are the paths that lead to genuine breakthroughs. Curiosity keeps the brain flexible. Rigid thinking relies on memorized rules, habitual responses, and safe assumptions. A curious mind challenges its own conclusions constantly. It adapts. It evolves. It does not fear confusion. It welcomes it as a sign of learning. This mental flexibility is a hallmark of powerful thinking. Another advantage of playful curiosity is resilience. When you treat learning as exploration rather than a checklist, you enjoy the journey itself. You are less discouraged by setbacks because every mistake becomes an experiment rather than a failure. Every dead end becomes data for the next attempt. The process becomes more important than the outcome, and in that process, mastery grows almost invisibly. Curiosity also sharpens observation. When you are genuinely interested, you notice details that others ignore. You see gaps in arguments, flaws in reasoning, or subtle patterns in nature. These observations may seem small, but they accumulate over time into insights that can change the way you think, act, and create. The playful mind is naturally self-motivated. You do not need external rewards to learn, because the act of exploration itself is rewarding. You follow questions wherever they lead, and the journey often uncovers answers you could never have anticipated. This intrinsic motivation is far more powerful than any discipline imposed from outside. Finally, curiosity connects learning across boundaries. When you are playful and open, ideas from one domain can inspire solutions in A principle learned in physics may illuminate a problem in art. A pattern in nature may guide a strategy in business. Curiosity does not recognize borders. It only recognizes connections. At this level, intelligence is no longer a static measure. It is dynamic. It is alive. It thrives not on certainty, but on engagement. Playful curiosity transforms the mind from a vessel that stores knowledge into a tool that explores, experiments, and creates. And when your brain works this way, you are no longer limited by what you already know. You are limited only by how boldly you are willing to ask, explore, and imagine. Admitting that you don't know something is one of the hardest things a person can do. It feels like weakness, like failure, like losing face in front of others or even in front of yourself. Yet this simple act, saying I don't know, is the single most powerful step toward real intelligence. It opens doors that memorization, pride, and confidence can never unlock. Most people live their lives avoiding this moment. They bluff, they guess, they repeat what they have heard, all to maintain the appearance of understanding. Society often rewards the pretense of knowledge over its reality. But the mind that refuses to admit ignorance shuts itself off from learning. Every claim accepted without question becomes a chain that binds the brain, and every unchallenged assumption becomes a blind spot. When you embrace honest ignorance, something remarkable happens. The mind becomes hungry again. Curiosity is awakened because you are no longer pretending. Instead of defending what you think you know, you are free to explore what you don't. You can ask questions without fear, test ideas without ego, and listen without judgment. The moment you accept that you don't know, learning becomes inevitable. This level of thinking is uncomfortable because it requires humility. Humility is often mistaken for weakness, but in reality, it is strength. The brain that admits ignorance is the brain that can grow. It is willing to challenge assumptions, revise beliefs, and rebuild understanding from the ground up. It does not cling to errors for the sake of pride. Instead, it treats every mistake as data, every gap in knowledge as an opportunity. Being honest about what you don't know also protects you from self-deception. The human mind is naturally inclined to believe convenient stories, to justify errors, to see patterns where none exist. Pretending to know tricks the brain into thinking it understands, while in truth it has only memorized fragments or repeated others' ideas. Admitting ignorance acts as a safeguard. It signals, check again. Question this, look deeper. Intellectual honesty at this level is active, not passive. It does not mean saying, I don't know, and then moving on. It means saying it and then investigating. It means engaging deeply with the unknown, being willing to look foolish, and patiently tracing the edges of your understanding. This is how real breakthroughs are born. Great discoveries rarely come from those who already feel they have all the answers. They come from those willing to stare into the unknown until it reveals its secrets. Honest ignorance also fosters better communication and collaboration. When you admit what you don't know, you invite others to contribute. You create an environment where questions are valued more than pretense. People respond to honesty because it signals trust and openness. The result is that ideas improve, understanding deepens, and solutions emerge that no single person could achieve alone. Another hidden benefit of this approach is resilience. Life and knowledge are complex, full of uncertainty. Pretending you know everything leaves you fragile, ready to collapse when confronted with unexpected problems. Embracing your ignorance, however, prepares you to adapt. You become a learner in all situations, able to confront challenges without ego, experiment freely, and pivot when necessary. At its core, admitting ignorance is not defeat, it is freedom. It frees you from the pressure of always being right. It frees your mind to explore. It frees your understanding from the limitations of unexamined assumptions. And when combined with curiosity, discipline, and honesty, it transforms the brain from a storage system into a tool of creation and discovery. The people who truly unlock their brain's potential are not those who appear confident or knowledgeable. They are the ones who can say, with courage and clarity, I don't know, and then follow that admission with relentless exploration. In that space, intelligence is no longer measured by what you already know. It is measured by your capacity to discover what you have yet to learn. And that is how the mind reaches its highest power. The greatest trap the mind can fall into is self-deception. We think we understand things more than we actually do. We trust our memory, our assumptions, our interpretations, and rarely pause to question whether what we believe is true. It's comfortable to live this way. It feels productive. It feels smart. But the reality is harsh. Without constant vigilance, the brain becomes a factory of errors, repeating the same mistakes over and over under the guise of knowledge. The first step to escaping this trap is awareness. You must recognize that your mind is capable of fooling you, and it does so every day. The brain does not lie maliciously. It lies efficiently to protect your ego, to simplify complexity, to avoid discomfort. Every time you accept an idea without testing it, every time you skip questioning because it feels tedious, you reinforce patterns that may be false. Intelligence is not what you think. You know, intelligence is your ability to see clearly despite these internal illusions. This is why self-skepticism is essential. It is not cynicism. It is not paralysis. It is active, disciplined doubt. It means examining your conclusions, tracing the logic that led to them, and asking if any assumptions went unchallenged. It means observing your own reasoning as if you were a scientist, with curiosity and rigor, rather than a judge protecting a verdict you already reached. This process is uncomfortable because it forces humility. You see flaws, contradictions, and gaps that pride would rather hide, but that discomfort is the price of clarity. Another aspect of avoiding self-deception is testing ideas in action. Thoughts in isolation can be beautiful, elegant, and convincing, but reality does not obey theory. You must apply what you think you know, experiment, measure outcomes, and adjust. This is the crucible of truth. Without it, your intelligence remains theoretical. With it, your thinking becomes alive, practical, and adaptive. Mistakes are no longer failures. They are signposts guiding your understanding. The mind that refuses to self-deceive also embraces skepticism, not of others, but of itself. It recognizes that confidence is not proof of correctness. It knows that assumptions, bias, and habit cloud judgment. This mental discipline separates passive knowledge from active intelligence. Passive knowledge tells you what others believe. Active intelligence tells you what is likely true, what is consistent, what can be relied upon. An essential tool in this process is simplification. Self-deception often hides behind complexity. When we struggle to explain something clearly, we create stories and justifications to cover gaps in understanding. By relentlessly seeking simple, fundamental explanations, the brain exposes these illusions. If an idea cannot survive plain scrutiny, it is not ready to guide action. Simplicity is a test, and passing it requires honesty with yourself. Curiosity plays a key role here as well. A mind that questions itself is a mind that continues to learn. You cannot spot deception if you are complacent. Every idea, every belief, every pattern should be open to investigation. The mind that stops questioning settles for the illusion of knowledge. The mind that questions relentlessly approaches real understanding. Finally, avoiding self-deception is a lifelong habit. The mind is never finished. Learning is never complete. Every day presents new information, new experiences, and new challenges to test assumptions. Those who reach the highest levels of mental power do so not because they are infallible, but because they maintain constant vigilance over their own thinking. They are aware that the most dangerous lies are the ones whispered by their own minds. By committing to honesty, skepticism, testing, and simplicity, you transform thinking from a passive accumulation of facts into an active engagement with reality. You build a mind that does not merely store knowledge, but interprets, analyzes, and adapts. You cultivate intelligence that is resilient, flexible, and alive. And in that disciplined awareness, the brain reaches its truest power, not in what it knows, but in its unwavering commitment to discover what is real.